How's everybody doing out there? Yeah, good, good. You guys ready to keep going? All right. Sean, I like your enthusiasm. All right, so I'm going to warn you guys now. It's after lunch. There's going to be a little bit of you're going to get sleepy. It's okay. Here's what we're going to do. Not right now. After the fireside chat. Avi's got it. We're going to get up. We're going to move around a little bit. It's going to be great. We don't need slides. I think we can handle it without slides. I want to remind everybody, roundtable topics, you will see if you go into the Community Summit channel in Drupal Slack that Martin posted a roundtable topic for event platform. He's going to volunteer to run one of those roundtables. So if you'd like to have a roundtable or see a topic for roundtables, jump in and do what Martin did. That's going to be the way we're going to organize roundtable discussions. So without further ado, I'm going to jump into our fireside chat with the Drupal Association CEO, Tim Doyle.
Testing. Okay. So where's the fireplace?
So quick story. Sorry, Amy June. Quick story. My wife gets backdrops for every holiday, and for Christmas there's a fireplace. She's like, "Oh, you're doing a fireside chat? Where's the fire?" And I go, "It's just a term." And she goes, "Do you want to take a backdrop with you?" And I'm like,
"You could have it up on the screen."
We're good. All right. So let's jump in really quick here. There are a good number of new folks in the room, new to Drupal, first DrupalCon, awesome. So first question here is, for those folks that might not necessarily know what the Drupal Association does, can you give them a high-level overview?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, John, for having me here, and welcome for the folks that have been ongoing Community Summit participants, welcome back, and for the new folks, welcome. I'm Tim Doyle, the CEO of the Drupal Association. We're the US-based not-for-profit that has global responsibilities for the Drupal project and the Drupal community. We're a 501c3. We're headquartered in Portland, Oregon, kind of the heart of Drupal Association when it was first started. But we are a small staff of 19, and we are global. So I have 8 or 9 staff that are outside the US. Our vision is a web that is open, innovative, and inclusive. And our mission at the DA is to drive innovation and adoption of Drupal as a digital public good, hand in hand with our open source community. So we do that through a number of activities. Our first and foremost, our basic activity is to make sure that Drupal.org is up and running, that it's secure, and we work with the project to make sure that the Drupal software is available to anyone, anywhere in the world to download anytime they want, free of charge. That's our fundamental task. But then we also support local associations, local camps. We run DrupalCons. We have a DrupalCon in North America, which we've been running for many years. We have a DrupalCon in Europe, which we've been running for many years. And then most recently, we started a DrupalCon Asia, and we held our first one in Singapore in December. And that was to bring the excitement of, and Mike Richardson's here, and who's helped one of the organizers. And that was to bring the excitement, the Drupal community in Southeast Asia, Australia, New Zealand, Oceania are very strong. And we wanted to bring a more accessible DrupalCon to them, closer. And it was very successful the first year, a lot of energy. So we do those things. And then we also work hand in glove with the project. So with updates, so we're actively working on Drupal CMS and other initiatives of the project to support their work. And I'll talk about this probably in a little bit, but lastly, our board has come up with a 3-year strategic plan where we're focused on innovation of Drupal, marketing of Drupal, and then finally raising resources for the global community. How do we get more funding, basically, coming into Drupal to support local camps, to support the Drupal Association activities, new contributor onboarding, etc. That might have been more than you wanted.
No, that was perfect. Okay. I think that covered everything that the Drupal Association does and helps with. Friendly reminder, if you'd like to ask a question, we are going to be opening it up to audience Q&A.
You didn't tell me that.
Surprise!
I want a very controlled environment.
So again, you can jump into the Community Summit Slack and ask your question in there if you would like. But let's go on to our next question. Along the same lines here for first timers, I'm wondering like what is your message for first time attendees to DrupalCon?
Okay, so officially I'm supposed to tell you that, which is good, we have and I don't know the details, but we have a room tomorrow. We have a room for first time attendees where you can go, and if you're feeling a little lost, and there's a place for you to go tomorrow with people that know what's going on and how to guide you and how to kind of put together a program that will help you in your first DrupalCon to go to the sessions that you think will be most valuable. That's going to be open tomorrow. It might be open today, but it's definitely going to be open tomorrow, which is the first. Who's running that? It's right over there. Oh, it's right next door.
Yeah.
Great, see.
Out this room to the left.
Perfect, okay, so that's officially. But unofficially, what I would suggest is get connected to people. Introduce yourself to people. My first DrupalCon was in Prague when I was interviewing for the job, and I was undercover because I didn't have the job yet, but the board wanted me to go around and meet people. I have never felt a more welcoming community in any type of community I've been involved in. So just get to know people, and you will find yourself all of a sudden, hanging out in the evening, doing things. So really take advantage of it. Even if you don't, even if you're here by yourself, you see someone sitting by themselves, just go introduce yourself and make those connections. It's the hallway work that really makes DrupalCon special, or one of the things that makes DrupalCon special. So this is not I would strongly suggest is make sure you walk out of here with far more connections than you walked in with, and just spend that time chatting with people. People are super friendly.
Awesome. So, Tim, what number DrupalCon is this for you? So you've attended DrupalCons kind of all over the globe. How many have you gone to?
This is my 6th DrupalCon.
Sixth.
Sixth,
Awesome.
yeah. So Prague in Europe was the first one, then Pittsburgh, Lille, Barcelona, Portland, Barcelona, and this one, yeah.
Man, that's impressive because, as I said earlier this morning, Austin was my first, and I can't I went to all of the other ones. I just don't, they're a big blur. But,
And I'm a newbie too, right? I mean, most people here have been to far more than me, so.
So along that same line, what's your favorite part about DrupalCon?
My favorite part, well, the Dries note is a highlight, obviously. I think the Dries note is the high production highlight that a lot of people look for, and it is, it's well worth the attendance going into that and the energy that comes out of that. The other highlight I like is, and it happened last night. It's kind of related to what I said about how to take advantage of DrupalCon by just connecting with people. I was part of a group that was at a bar a few blocks away, and there's about 100 of us. That bar closed down, and 100, I don't know how many, 50 or 60 of us walked down the street to another one, and we're just hanging out. So my favorite part is just being able to see people hang out in person and just have these kind of random conversations, and not planned and all that. Again, back to being connected. The Drupal Association, we're fully remote. A lot of people, I work a lot online with people all over the globe, which is really cool. So when I get the chance to hang out with them in person, that's pretty exciting.
Awesome. I apologize in advance. Some of these questions are a little bit unfair, like our next one. What do you feel is the most important DA initiative happening right now?
Right now, interesting. So I said our 3 strategic goals was innovation of Drupal, marketing, and resource raising for the Drupal community and the Drupal project. Those are the priorities that the board put out in our 3-year strategic plan. So innovation is super important, and I think that sums up with the Drupal CMS effort. I personally think right now that the most important work that we're doing is on the marketing side, because we are up against proprietary software that has marketing budgets in the millions or tens of millions of dollars globally. And that is what we're competing with, Drupal's competing with, in order to get the attention of end users. And that's one. 2, I think related to marketing, besides the budget, the decision making about how people choose a CMS or how people choose to do a digital transformation, that decision making is not always, it used to be heavily driven by the IT staff or the CTO maybe at an organization. More and more that's being driven by the CIO or the business side of organizations, and we just don't have the angles in there. And so when we're up against these other softwares, we're competing kind of with one arm tied behind our back a lot of times. So I do think the marketing, we don't our job at the Drupal Association, we don't sell any services. We don't make money on marketing Drupal, selling Drupal. So we really do it so that when people go to conferences, they see Drupal, they see Adobe Experience Manager, they see Wix, whatever, they also see Drupal. And it just gets in, they're like, oh yeah, Drupal's just another good option. And we know it's the best option, but it's another option. And so while marketing might not sound super, community oriented or anything, I do believe that it's probably the most important thing we can be doing, at least at the DA right now, is to get the word out about Drupal, get governments, organizations to consider it and adopt it. And from that flows more people coming into Drupal, more businesses starting Drupal, support for local camps and other things. I think we're in a pitched battle. Europe's ahead of us in the US. We're in a pitched battle of open source versus proprietary. Right now, Europe is doing a really good job of focusing on open source as a digital utility. They're viewing it as a digital utility, like your water pipes underground that you don't think about, but you need for commerce, you need for everything. And we need to be able to do that in the States. We need to be able to do that in other parts of the globe.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, I think, Drupal is a digital public good, and like we have to work pretty hard to keep it going. And yeah,
Right.
I think that's super important. So if you were here this morning, you heard me say that I was at Adobe Summit last week, and Tim just alluded to other CMSs out there, other platforms out there, and us marketing, to get the word out about how great Drupal is. But I'm wondering, what else is the Drupal Association doing to ensure the future of Drupal?
So I think, that's another good question.
I'm full of them.
I see the future of Drupal. What's super important is making sure, I'm trying to think of how to say this without being too crass, but is making sure that that Drupal has a sustainable revenue model or financial model. And this is not just affected by Drupal. I know I'm going to say things that people say, oh yeah, every open source project deals with this. But Drupal's 24 years old. CMSs are super hugely important on the web, but not the highlight, I'm not going to get into the DXP argument or anything, but
sure.
But it's not, it's not the new thing. And we have a community that's hugely experienced. But what we don't have is a financial model that makes sure that that all is sustainable on an ongoing basis. Mm-hmm. That people are earning, people that are contributing a lot are also able to make a living. Companies that are invested in Drupal are also able to be an ongoing concern. The Drupal Association is able to do the things that we do with updating the servers and all that, and it's just not a sustainable model right now. And I think the board just met so before every DrupalCon, the Drupal Association board, which is 13 members from across the globe. We have 5 in the US, I think, and 7 outside the US. We just met for a weekend retreat. We did that before DrupalCon Europe, DrupalCon North America. And this financial sustainability was one of the things that we talked about, which is how do we make sure that there's enough resources that are sustaining developers, that are sustaining marketers that are involved in Drupal, companies, the DA, the local camps and associations, all the things that keep the community. The Community Summit is our most popular summit. This thing is sold out. I guess we don't charge for it, so it's. That is awesome. And how do we keep that going? And so I'm focused on there's all this community development type work that John and other the leaders do to keep that going. And I'm more focused on how do we keep the funding that supports that going. So I do think that's the biggest challenge at we're doing marketing. We've hired 2 marketers, so that's happening, and I think that's an important external effort. But in terms of what is the DA doing to make sure that 10 years from now, I had this conversation with Dries. I said, what are we doing right now to make sure 20 years from now that Drupal is as strong as it ever was? And so getting this financial model right, I think is super important. The innovation stuff happens, and we figure, Drupal CMS is fantastic, and the marketing, I think, is we know what to do there. This financial model with open source is tougher. We don't quite have that figured out.
Do you feel that the marketing angle of Drupal, right, is the key to kind of combating or cracking the other CMSs, other platforms out there that are kind of like, taking people away from Drupal?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a part of that is, part of the marketing is going to the decision makers at the enterprise level. Again, they're sometimes on the business side, not on the IT side. But a part of the marketing is also focused on going, head to head, making it accessible, get the word out there, making it easy to start Drupal and to jump into it and to learn about it. And so that it's in people's, people in the space know Drupal. And when I talk to people, when I first took the job 2.5 years ago and people said, where are you going? I'm going to Drupal. They didn't know anything about Drupal because they weren't in the space. People in the space know Drupal. But everyone outside the space knows Adobe. We all know Adobe. And so when Adobe Experience Manager had, okay, I know Adobe, I can make the shift over to Experience Manager. So there, how do we make sure Drupal, it's a little bit far, but people in the IT space should understand Drupal, to know about it, even if they don't know it in detail, hear about it, know that it's just accessible. And then I think a rising tide will lift all ships. If we are able to drive market adoption of Drupal, like I said, there's going to be more resources coming back into the community.
So follow up on that one, right? I know that the DA kind of worked to get off the Drupal island, as it was, and go to events outside of DrupalCons, Drupal camps, that sort of thing. Are we planning to do more of that in 2025, 2026?
Yes, we are. So we did. Our first one was in November of 23. We did the Web Summit in Portugal. It was a 70,000 person conference. It was huge. And the funny thing is, we thought we'd be out there talking to people about Drupal and trying to explain what it is to them. The vast majority of people, we had two types. One came over and said, oh yeah, I used Drupal 5 years ago or 10 years ago. It's still around? And we're like, yes, it's still around. And we're explaining how it's updated and how it's much easier now and so forth. And then the other cohort was people that wanted to partner with, we have this app and we want to connect it to Drupal. Yeah. So just being there was that connection. So that's what we did. We did the Higher Ed Web Summit in September. I think they changed their name. I think it's like something Collegium now. But anyway, so we have a partnership with them actually where we attend each other's conferences.
Oh, great.
And so you'll see them here. But anyway, we did that summit. That's for U.S.-based higher ed education universities. It's their IT summit. We're doing in Q2 of this year in April, a few weeks, we're doing the digital summit in Chicago.
Oh, cool.
And we're doing the not-for-profit conference N10 in Baltimore. And we have a list of other ones we're doing in Q3 and Q4, and there's still opportunities for people to participate in those. But these are non-Drupal events. These are events where non-Drupal, it's outside of the community, and we're trying to get the Drupal name out there to folks that are not inside they're not the believers that are in the room here or that attend DrupalCon.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I was talking to somebody earlier, it might have been Avi, I don't remember, but suggested that we get a booth at Adobe Summit.
I like it.
Just throwing it out there.
I didn't know Avi was that aggressive. That's great to hear. He looks like a nice guy, but I can see he's a little cutthroat.
Avi can confirm or deny if that was him. But
I like it.
So switching gears a little bit, obviously there are other CMSs out there. We've named a few, and there's been a little bit of turmoil, to say the least, in the WordPress community.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you can explain to veteran members of the community as well as new members of the community how the Drupal community is better positioned to avoid the sorts of issues that we're seeing in the WordPress community.
Sure, and I wrote a blog. I wrote a blog on this in November on this because of the WordPress, what was going on in the WordPress community. And do people still use the word blog? Because I told my kids I wrote a blog and they laughed at me.
I mean, I do, but
article. That's why they laughed at me. Okay, thank you. So I might name things the wrong things. I wrote an article in November on this very subject. And so there's a lot of differences between Drupal project and WordPress project in the governance, and that's really the key to what you see happening. So let me start at the highest level. Is the Drupal Association. We're a 501c3 nonprofit corporation that is completely legally independent of the Drupal project. The only connection is that Dries, the project lead, is on our board. But our board has 12 voting members. He is one vote of 12, okay? And we get no money from Dries, and we send him no money. So there's no money going back and forth between project, except to fund work, but there's no money, revenue, profit coming back to the DA or from the DA to the project. That's one. Second, one of my goals when I came on board, one of the goals the board had for me was to diversify the funding for the Drupal Association. We were primarily funded by events. Pandemic hit, that hurt, and now we're much more diversified in our funding. And when I go out and I talk to non-community members about open source, I always claim that we are one of the largest independent open source projects in the world. And what I mean by that is that we're not primarily financed by a single corporation, right? We're not like primarily financed by Microsoft or Google or Facebook, Meta, whatever they're called. You know, we have no one organization gives more than 10% of our revenue, and we're trying to even diversify that further. So there's really no commercial connection between the Drupal project and the Drupal Association. Now, that's kind of the highest level. The next level down is we have a perpetual license granted to the Drupal Association from Dries, and to use the Drupal trademark, Drupal.org, etc. Now, before you zone out, I know John said this is after lunch and you might get a little tired. And when I start talking law, you might be like, oh, he's going to go into trademark law. I'm not going to go into detail, but here's the key. We, the Drupal Association, control Drupal.org, the servers that have the most recent version of Drupal on it. The worst thing that could happen if there's a conflict between Dries, who gives us the trademark, and us, if there's a conflict, is that he could tell us to stop using the word Drupal, but he could not prevent us from keeping the servers up and running, from providing, it would be a fork, right? He couldn't stop any of that. And so we can independently guarantee to end users who say, hey, how am I going to know I can access stuff? They can come to us. There's, Dries has no control over that. So there's a huge, and so without, and I don't know all the stuff that's going on in the WordPress community, but those are like the salient issues that make us different. The DA has complete independent control of the Drupal servers and the software, and we control who accesses them and doesn't, and it's separate from the project. And then at the highest level, we're funded independently, and that's why it's right before this, part of the reason I came in at the last minute is I was making a pitch about our Ripple Makers program, asking people to kind of help contribute, because the more independent we are, the much less susceptible we are to those kind of governance and personality. Once you infuse commercial, if the DA was making, once you infuse commercial relationships into an open source relationship, it gets very tricky, and in my mind, problematic.
Awesome. All right, so we've reached the audience portion of our program here, and you guys are doing great work in Slack to post your questions, so I appreciate that. I'm going to read a couple of these. Some of them are, we'll answer them, but if anybody wants to, verbally, share their question, feel free to put your hand up, and I will call on you. So the first question we have here in Slack is, how does the DA plan to adapt to the changing political landscape, especially when policy or political changes don't reflect the values that Drupal is well known for, such as diversity and inclusion?
That's a good question. So thank you for that question. There's a couple ways we look at it. Let's start at the highest level, is that at the Drupal Association, we have very concrete responsibilities, keeping the servers running, so forth. But we do have this sense, and the board, I think, lives into this sense that we are also sometimes the spokespeople for the Drupal project or for the Drupal community. We don't always want to be, because we're just one voice. We're not the only voice. So I want to be that clear. But the board at times has said, hey, you know, we have to make a statement, or we have to do and say something. We do two things. One, I would say, is first of all, we have a global responsibility. So yes, the political situation in the U.S. right now is fraught and chaotic. We do represent the Drupal community broadly, and you know, in the past few years, other parts of the globe have had fraught. Our Drupal communities in other parts of the globe were in more fraught and chaotic situations. Our values haven't changed, and so the things that we control, DrupalCon, who the Drupal Association invites to speak at DrupalCon or invites to become members of our community, we still live into our values in those relationships and in what we do. The situation currently in the U.S., we are, it doesn't change, I mean, in my mind, it doesn't change our values or change how we are doing our day-to-day work in promoting Drupal. It does mean we have to be, you know, we have to work both at the strategic level and at the tactical level. And the strategic has to be longer term. I'm 100% convinced that the Drupal community and the values of the Drupal community are going to outlive the current administration. 100% convinced of that. Tactically, how do we get there? Means supporting the community members, and I've talked to a lot of companies that have had contracts cut off overnight, you know, which is ridiculous, but it is happening. So how do we support those? How do we support those companies, and still continue to make sure that we're positioning Drupal as a viable option through this chaos? So I think what we're trying to do is amplify, and you'll hear a little bit over the course of the next 2 days, and we have a public board meeting of our board on Tuesday, tomorrow. We're trying to continue to live into our values and the things that we control and the spheres that we control, which is DrupalCon, which is how we operate at the DA, but also within the community, and then to navigate in a politically savvy way the things that pop up, whether it's Ukraine, whether it's October 7th, whether it's what's going on in the U.S. right now, and then how do we navigate those things so that we can continue to live into our values and you know, not hurt the community, but actually continue to make sure the community is going to be here when we come out the other end of this.
Awesome. The questions don't get easier. I apologize.
That's fine.
So this one I think is relevant to a lot of folks, and you know, we're seeing a number of layoffs across organizations in not only Drupal but the greater tech space, and there are a lot of people out there looking for work and agencies looking for clients to serve. Wondering what the DA plans to do to promote Drupal CMS, and kind of get people back to work with Drupal. I know we already talked about marketing, but
right.
Are there other things that the DA is doing?
Right, thank you. So marketing is the number one way that we're trying to grow the Drupal, grow Drupal adoption, and therefore, you know, the piece of the pie that comes down to Drupal developers and companies. That is the number one way and the most impactful way that Drupal Association can take a role in that. And we've hired, I said, we've hired 2 product marketers. They're around, and you should, you know, talk to Nick and Ryan. If you see them, talk to them. I know Nick, I think I saw you here.
Oh, he's in the back.
Stand in the back, standing up, right. So that's one thing we're doing. What are other things that we're doing? So one thing we're looking at is how do we have a Drupal certified partner program, and companies that contribute back to the Drupal project can become a Drupal certified partners, and we're beginning to promote those companies with end users that are seeking services. We have a model RFP that we put out there, and that we're targeting, and we're at actually at the other summits, which have end users that issue RFPs, asking them to use this RFP or language within the RFP that speaks to a preferential option for open source in sourcing their projects, because we believe that, especially if you're government, public money should go for public goods. But this RFP would give preferential option to open source and specifically Drupal. So we're saying, hey, if you're going to use Drupal, work with companies that give back to the community and contribute. volunteer time and other things. And then we are working with our companies. So a lot of companies I've talked to a lot of CEOs over the last month. Like I said, I live outside DC in Arlington, and so I know a lot of people, my personal and professional life, that are being affected by this. And I've talked to folks, and if I'm keeping my ears open. If I hear projects open up, I'm making sure that I'm calling these people and letting them know, but that's kind of informal. I think figuring out this financial, our ability to grow the pie and keep open source sustainable through this current softening means we have to kind of double down on developing this business model where the people that are the individual developers that are giving back, that are contributing, that are experts in Drupal are getting we're elevating them and getting the business to them at the individual level, at the company level, et cetera. And so looking at how do we make sure that companies that aren't contributing back don't get the business from the companies that do. That's an indelicate way to say it, but I think that's kind of what we're looking at. That's our kind of long-term goal and mission on this. Currently, we're in a downturn. I think the tech market was already in a downturn, and then the events of the last 6 weeks just made it worse. So, we're kind of limited in our ability to turn that quickly. But this is kind of we have to double down on our marketing activities. We have to double down on driving attention to Drupal, driving business to the Drupal partners and people that attend DrupalCons that are giving back to the community. So I hesitate only because that's an inadequate response. I wish I had a big, hey, this is going to be better in 6 months, and here's the magic key. But it's a softening period that we have to get through. Let me say one last thing. Sure. I do think Drupal, and I hope you're going to attend the Dries tomorrow, but Drupal CMS, I think, is a key to getting more people to look at Drupal. So we do have a trial experience on Drupal.org where it makes it pretty easy to try out Drupal CMS. I'm not a technical person, so if I can do it, you can do it, is the message. But I do think getting more people try, and I know a lot of companies are doing their own trial experience and things, getting people, getting Drupal simplified down for that the ambitious site builder and marketers, I do believe in that message, and that will get more people familiar with Drupal, into Drupal. I think companies will have to adapt to how they work with Drupal CMS when they're demoing Drupal and so forth. But I think it can be the way to get more people into Drupal, drive some market adoption of Drupal by Drupal seeming more accessible. Again, it's a little bit longer term. That's not going to create jobs in the next 6 months, but I do think it's going to draw a lot of attention to Drupal.
So I want to clarify on something that I heard there, and I think that was a great answer to not a very easy question. Yeah. But I heard you say that you're reaching out to different people. Is the DA actively reaching out to organizations, companies, out in the world that are looking at replatforming their CMS and saying, hey, have you thought about Drupal? Here's our 5-minute elevator pitch on Drupal and why you might want to consider it.
We the DA are not directly reaching out to potential end users directly and saying, think about Drupal. But what we are doing are looking at a couple of initiatives that we're connecting known and bona fide Drupal agencies with end users. Our marketing team and the rest of our association is putting together materials that help communicate the impact of the benefits of Drupal. You'll see we have a new d.org. It was rolled out. The main page and some of the sub pages. We're continuing to deepen that, roll that out, and we're changing d.org. D.org will always have a huge component that has to do with the community, right? It's where you come and do all that stuff. But the front page and the vestibule are going to be focused on not the community, on the first timers and the people who are shopping for a CMS or whatever. So we're looking at hosting events that with partners that communicate Drupal's benefits to non-community members globally. So we're looking at doing one in Australia, a couple in Europe in this year. We are looking at materials that help communicate the impact of Drupal to non-community members, and we're doing those in concert with our partners, getting feedback from our partners, so that when they're going out, they're obviously pitching to sell services, and so they can point to Drupal Association, which is kind of the objective, like, purveyor of objective information about Drupal, and say, you know, it's not just us, go to this website and here's some materials. So we are, and then we're looking at how do we get more end users, how do we engage with more end users at DrupalCons or other types of events. And so both those are using Drupal and those are not.
Awesome.
Yeah, and we just don't have the staff to actually be out calling people one-on-one. You know, we kind of work through our partners.
Cool. So, you know, this next question I think is interesting to me, because I think a lot of what happens at the DA kind of is like behind the scenes, right? We don't see, you know, we don't necessarily see it at the forefront as often. So the question is, as a general Ripple maker individual, it's often unclear if the DA is successful in the mission or not. It's been around so long and often feels like the background set dressing in the community. Could you share some of the specific success criteria or KPIs used to measure outcomes at the DA?
That's a great question. Wow. So yeah, so I get that. We've been around, the Drupal Association has been around for, at least in the US, it's been around for 17 years. And as I said, our primary job is to make sure the servers are up and running. You can download Drupal anywhere for free. So our biggest KPI is that our website's up and running and you can access Drupal. But you're right, that's not super visible. So our strategic plan has 3 areas. I mentioned it. Innovation, marketing, and resource raising. We have on the innovation side, we are trying to prompt an increase, basically a tripling of strategic innovation contributions to Drupal in a 3-year period. And I don't have the graphs here. If you come to the public meeting tomorrow, I'll have the graphs. And we're on track for doing that. So we're on track for tripling contributions. We're also trying to grow our Drupal Certified Partner Program. The original goal was to double it, to get to 106. We're at 108, so we've exceeded that goal, and we're doing that very well. On the marketing side, we had goals to do a marketing strategy, which we've completed. We've brought on 2 marketing product marketers, and now we have goals around holding a certain number of non-community events where we're engaging with non-community users, folks to talk about Drupal. We have goals around improving the search SEO for Drupal.org that will drive people to Drupal, and so forth. So, and then on the resource raising, really our goal is to try to triple the amount of money that the DA can spend in supporting the project and the community, and that's probably the one that we're stalling on the most. It's been hard coming out of the pandemic to significantly raise the revenue that we're able to bring in and give out to the community. I think then that's like the official metrics. We have a staff that's devoted her time over the last 1.5 years to understanding what's happening at the local level. Joy's part of this. She's worked a lot in connecting the Drupal Association with our local association and local event organizers, and we don't have specific KPIs around that per se, but we're getting a much better presence and understanding of what's happening at the global Drupal level. And I think folks that are coming from far away will begin to see more and more of the Drupal Association being able to understand and help and support in small ways, maybe some big ways, what's happening in Europe, what's happening in the Middle East, what's happening with the Drupal community, what's happening in Asia and so forth. And then I would just say DrupalCon Singapore was an outgrowth of wanting to support the community in that part of the world. Very visible and successful DrupalCon. So those are some of the ways that I know we operate, and you know, if it's not our top priority, but I wish we could do more in communicating what we do. We do a newsletter. If you're not on our newsletter, get that, because we do communicate out what we're doing. There's a lot for a kind of a small 18, 19 person organization that we are. But probably the thing that we don't do great is just communicating everything that we're doing.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that comes to mind when I'm looking at that question is all the great stuff Tim Lennon and his team have been doing over the
Yeah.
last couple of years to like improve the infrastructure, improve the merge request process,
Yeah.
move us to
GitLab.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yep.
I was like, which Git is it?
Yes.
But like all of those things, like for me, feel like a great testament to the DA working behind the scenes to improve the community.
Yeah, and Project Browser, automatic updates, the GitLab migration, all that, and that's stuff I don't fully understand, but hearing great things about the improvements, especially with GitLab, and we've adapted the credit system and so forth to make it work with it, and I think we're in the final stages of the full migration. Ironically, it also drove up our costs because and I don't know this, I can't figure this out fully, I can't explain this fully, but basically we made it easier for testing, so people did more testing, and so our testing costs go up.
Right. Right.
And so, which is good, but it's fun. It's funny how,
There are a lot of tests. Every time I hear the stat, I'm kind of like, man, that's a lot of tests. So that funding question, that brings me to my next question here. And this is kind of talking about a point you already made about fiscal independence from corporate influence. So that's a huge benefit in the project, but it historically could also be considered one of our biggest liabilities. It seems like the DA is falling on tough financial times more often than not. When the DA's biggest funders are agencies, how do you kind of weather, falling on hard times for those agencies, because they're probably less likely to give. So what does the DA do to kind of keep the lights on, keep the money coming in?
That's great. Thank you for that question. And that's what I noticed too, is that I've been here 2.5 years. One of my mandates when I came on was to diversify the revenue base of the Drupal Association, but also to grow it, and that was put into our strategic plan. And so my understanding of the historic was there were a lot of big companies that gave a lot of money on kind of a sponsorship or a kind of a donation basis to keep it going, because the owners of those companies grew up with Drupal and they got successful in their companies and they really felt this need to give back, which was awesome. My take is a little bit coming in from the outside. I'm not an open source person by background. My source is that we need to have a business model that makes open source sustainable in the long run, that isn't just dependent on the largesse of a few large companies, or the emotional connection that people have with the beginning of Drupal and riding that out. I think everyone has emotion, like people that are joining today, and I met people in Singapore that were so excited to be at their first DrupalCon. And so yes, the emotional connection is great, but not dependent on that to drive the revenues. And so things that we're looking at, I'm trying to incorporate into the Drupal Association operations a business model that can help us fund open source. And that's going to mean a couple things. So I mentioned a couple times our certified partner program. Companies, we should, bluntly, we should drive business to companies that give back to the community. I can't say it any more clear than that. And there has to be this virtual cycle on that. And so we're going to double down on that. That's one. That's a cycle. You're contributing to make Drupal better, which makes it more attractive in the market. Then you should get more of the business, right? Second, can we look at services that the Drupal Association can provide? Doesn't compete with services offered by our partners or in the market, services that they can't be. So we have a Drupal Steward program, which for folks that do hosting, if they host their own sites or if they host other sites, we can sign an agreement with them and give them early access when there's a vulnerability identified, and so they have heads up ahead of time and they can implement on 0 day and not be caught off guard. And that's only something we can do because we manage a security team of volunteers that work on our security working group. And we right now we provide a subscription for that. There are probably other models of things that the DA exclusively can do that helps end users that are using Drupal, or large companies that are hosting many sites or other things that we can ask them if they're making a lot of money hosting a bunch of Drupal sites, can they also subscribe to a service that helps fund the work that we're doing. So I don't have details I can roll out now, but in the next 6 months we should have more details about things that we can do that creates this business model of a sustainable revenue stream coming into the community for keeping Drupal going.
And So correct me if I'm wrong, but as a Ripple maker, you have access to the Drupal Association annual report. Is that
Yep.
is that accurate? Okay.
Yep.
So you can get more financials
Yes.
and initiatives and all that stuff in that report.
Yeah, so we do an impact report, which is like the glossy kind of feel good, but it has information in it. And then as a US-based not-for-profit, our financial statements are always public. When I came on board, we were getting an audit every other year. I've moved that up to every year. So our 1099s, our financials are.
I don't feel like that's common for a lot of CEOs, but okay, I appreciate that.
Yeah. So our financial statements are we get a full audit every year, and they're public. So you can go and see all of that. They're very transparent. Part of the reason I think we're in the U.S. is that U.S. has very strong not-for-profit transparency rules.
Awesome. So moving into kind of supporting students or youths within, from a DA standpoint, I'm wondering if the DA has ever considered supporting summer of youth employment programs or career-ready internship programs in the U.S. to kind of help, get Drupal into more, to more
Right.
younger folks,
Right.
get people more excited about the community and what it has to offer.
Yeah, we have done some things in the past. So we had a few. When I started, we had a Discover Drupal program, which wasn't focused only on youth directly, but it was more for folks that were from backgrounds that made getting into technology harder. And so we had an intern and training program, and that was successful for the people that went through it, but a very small number of people could go through it. It wasn't really scalable. We are supporting. And again, I'm going to probably butcher the explanation on this, but the IXP program, Carlos, right?
Carlos presented on that this morning.
Okay, good. So Carlos is the guy to talk to on that, but we're doing that by companies that, so I think the way we can do is how do we engage on this? We can't run the whole we are right now 18 people globally can't run an intern program.
Right.
We would take interns if people want to intern with the DA. I'd love to have that, but we can't run an intern program. But what we can do is support initiatives that are in the community that are trying to do that, like the IXP, and we're doing that by giving contribution credits to companies that will bring interns in through the IXP program. We do participate in Google Summer of Code.
Yep.
We do that, and I think this is getting new contributors into Drupal and teaching them how to contribute is one of the areas that we would like to grow into. In fact, the board just talked about that this weekend. And while we don't have anything active right now, I think Drupal CMS begins to give that opportunity to have that kind of entry level, get into Drupal, understand Drupal. We had Dries told this in his Dries note a year ago when he rolled out Drupal CMS that he had this someone was working at Aqua that was also teaching an IT class, and they were like, "Why don't you teach Drupal?" And the guy said, "By the time the students get set up in it, it's like the semester's half over." So that issue, and then you're trying to teach them the concepts,
Yep.
right? So Drupal CMS solves that, right? Because you can get set up in the first day of class.
Yep.
So I do think that when Drupal CMS is fully rolled out, it begins to build a platform that we can then get more engaged on how do we really do impactful kind of beginner and especially college student and even high school student involvement in Drupal.
Yeah, I remember I was asked to do a CMS intro class at a local university, and like the first 2 weeks were like, let's set up your local environment, now let's install it, and then like people were like, eyes were glazing over. So
Yeah.
that definitely makes a lot of sense. All right, before we get into our lightning round, one final
Wait,
question.
lightning round? That sounds dangerous.
You'll be all right. These are the fun questions. There's also a trick question in there, just to warn you. But before we get there, wondering what, if any, the DA has planned to kind of get other regions, outside of the U.S. and Europe, kind of involved in, the partner programs that are offered out there. You know, specifically regions that might not be able to kind of meet some of the requirements that are needed to kind of get like an association together. Does DA have any plans or programs to help with that?
Yeah, so I think, again, Joy's work is front and center to that effort. And so we spent, and Joy, I apologize if I butcher any of your work. You can come up later and correct it. But really, she spent the last year trying to build relationships and understand what the local associations needed, the local event organizers needed. And now we have a robust set of initiatives that we're doing this year to engage, you know, more fully with them and support them. DrupalCon Singapore was out of a growth specifically for that reason. Yeah. Very strong market. We had active leaders that wanted to create a regional event that could build excitement and get people going. So, you know, DA and the DA board is very supportive of that. We launched our first one and very successful. So I think those are the two ways that we're building the network. I think what we're seeing in Europe, I think Europe's in the area. So 60% of our Drupal certified partners from the US, or 55, and about 30% are from Europe, and then the rest are from Asia and then spotted around. So I do see growth in the Asian and New Zealand and Australian market in terms of getting, there's a lot of Drupal stuff going on out there. There's a lot of Drupal business, and how are we getting those people engaged in contributions and engaged in South America? There's a very strong community in Brazil, Colombia, Panama, and Costa Rica. And how do we create, maybe not a DrupalCon, but how do we create an event that is exciting for them, that kind of a regional event, right? So that these people can get together and build that. And then I think the Middle East. I think the Middle East has some opportunities. I think it's a growing market for Drupal. And I met several folks in DrupalCon Barcelona, and that's a very nascent market. And then lastly, something we did, I'm not sure if I mentioned this, but Joy once again kind of helped with this, which was last year we sponsored a camp in Burkina Faso.
Oh, cool.
The representative came to DrupalCon Lille in France. Is he here? Oh, there he is.
Hey.
Woo. Awesome. So I'm glad you're here. Thank you. So, you know, that's what we'd love to do. And this is what I was just before this making a pitch for Ripple Makers. And I said, like, you know, those, you know, when you give your $100 a year or whatever you can do, like, that's where we can do more of these camps, right? Like, we have to have local, we can't create it. We can only take local energy and enhance it or support it, you know? We can't create that local energy, but when there is local energy and we can do something, like the more resources we can raise for the community, the more we can spur that kind of stuff on.
Those higher ed summit folks, we'll get them later.
Aren't they supposed to be working over there?
So correct me again if I'm wrong, and maybe if you don't know the answer, somebody in the room does, but Ripple Makers, is that a US only program?
No.
Okay.
No, Ripple Makers, here's the thing, if you're alive and breathing, you can be a Ripple Maker. So it is a way that, so the Drupal community, we had 7,000 people make contributions last year to Drupal. The Drupal community, when you talk about people attending events and end users and all that, is even much larger. It's like in the hundreds of thousands, right? What the Ripple Makers program really tries to do is to say, yes, we work at the corporate level, but you at the individual level, if you're making, if you're involved in the Drupal community, if you support the work of the DA's doing to support the community, can you make a small contribution on an annual basis to support the work that we do? So, $100 a year, $15 a month, whatever works, as a way of just a sign that this very strong and healthy Drupal community is given back at the individual personal level. Awesome. And then we take those funds and we're able to provide scholarships to people to attend DrupalCon. In DrupalCon Singapore, we had 5 scholarships. 20, and we didn't fund it all. I mean, we had other folks giving the money. Thank you. But those are allow people to go to their first DrupalCon that otherwise wouldn't go. Yeah. Like, those are the kind of things that we're able to do when we're able to expand the revenue that we're bringing in.
Yeah, I know as a local event organizer, the DA set up a program where, as people signed up for their DrupalCon tickets, they were, depending on how many people associated with their local regional camps, those Camp Scott free tickets to give away. Like as an organizer, nothing better than giving away free stuff. I love giving away free stuff. Like you get to go to DrupalCon, you get to go to DrupalCon. So definitely appreciate that.
Right.
All right, so we have just about 5-7 minutes here left.
Okay.
And we're going to go into our lightning round of questions. I'll warn you, there is a trick question in here, so we'll see if you fall for it. First and foremost, what's your favorite color?
Green.
Green. Mine
Green.
too. High five. Nice. I like
Green.
All right. How about this? Favorite food?
Favorite food? Pizza.
Yeah, pizza's good. Lasagna is also. I'm kind of like that.
It sounds boring though, but pizza. But.
Yeah, no, that's fine. You can do a lot with pizza these days. What about your favorite Drupal module?
Now you're testing my technical knowledge. Is e-commerce a module?
Commerce is, yeah.
Commerce.
There it is. All right. Sweet. All right. So, favorite DrupalCon location? This could be a trap. This is not the trick question.
This could be a trap. So far, I'll have to say Prague was awesome.
Yeah.
I really like Prague.
Cool. I think for me,
It might have been my first though. That might have been it. But
admittedly, I've only been to North America DrupalCons. I know, frowny face, but like Seattle, Austin, those are both pretty awesome. I don't know. Sometimes I feel like anytime we get the Drupal community together, it's a good one. All right, here we go. Where is next year's DrupalCon North America?
oh yeah, that's awesome. I'm excited. Wait a minute.
I tried.
Not gonna do it.
I tried.
Not gonna do it.
All right, so you've made it. You've made it to our last question, which is, what message or feeling do you hope that attendees leave this year's DrupalCon with?
I hope that you leave with the sense of excitement for the future of Drupal. I really feel like that, just since I've come on board, that there's so many exciting things that are happening in the Drupal community with the Drupal project, CMS, with the growth of DrupalCons, and the energy and the excitement. Like my first DrupalCon in Prague, the energy and excitement. I talked about the welcoming side, which was awesome and probably the highlight, but also just the energy and excitement of getting people together about it. But I really do think that if there's anything you walk away from, I hope you walk away with new relationships and networking, but I hope you also just walk away with like an inspiring idea that the future of Drupal is super bright, that there's this is our message we got to market. Like there's so much ahead for Drupal. Drupal still, people from a feature list, I was talking to people last night at the bar about, from a feature list, it outdoes everything. And it's about communicating that out. It's about, and now with Drupal CMS, which is even a broader market that can be reached. So and then the initiatives, we mentioned several of the initiatives in here. Like there's a lot of exciting things happening in the Drupal world, and I hope you leave with that excitement and energy coming out of hearing different things, networking, learning stuff. That you come out with the idea that the future of Drupal is super bright.
Awesome. Let's give it up for Tim.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
All right. You know what? You guys earned yourself a break. So let's see. I believe this is a 15-minute break or so. So we're going to be back at 2:30. 2:30. So it's about 20 minutes. I hear you. And if you want to use the podium, you can totally do that. I was just sitting here for the fireside chat. But, I don't know. You want power too?
Yeah.
So are you gonna want to sit or are you gonna want to stand?
Probably stand.
Okay.
It's easier to.
Yeah, if you want to. right. Community Summit attendees, how we doing? Okay. I promised you you might not enjoy this, but we're gonna do a little bit, get everybody's blood flowing a little bit here. Okay, so if you're able, do me a favor and stand up like Avi's doing right now. Stand up, yep. Take a nice deep breath in. Yep, all right, yep. Get those arms moving, yep, okay. All right, wonderful. All right, so now, Community Summit, how are we doing? You guys are getting there. Maybe by the round tables, we'll have that perfected. All right, jump back into your seats and buckle up. I know. You're like, where's the seatbelt on these things? So we're going to jump into a session right now. We have Christopher Gervais here to talk about Everyone's Voice Matters, Empowering Stakeholders with Sociocracy. So give it up for Christopher.
Thank you. I'm just going to jump right in. I've been a part of the Drupal community for about 20 years now. I have been using Sociocracy for about 5 in the small tech co-op that I co-founded about 7 years ago. What we're going to look at today is sort of what Sociocracy is all about, why bother. Then we're going to look at how we work together in small teams, and then how we organize sets of teams together to be able to scale up. We're going to look at some of the benefits and challenges, do a bit of Q&A at the end, and then if we have time, I might do some demonstrations of some of the tools that we use. So getting right into it, Sociocracy is a peer governance system based on consent. So I'm going to sort of tell you some stories of experiences of how I came to Sociocracy to really illustrate what this is all about. My first interaction with Sociocracy, I didn't know it at the time. They didn't call it Sociocracy, but it was at college. I was in a program called the New School, and they did this weird thing where they organized their classes into what they called learning circles. And instead of having a professor, they had a facilitator. And instead of just being assigned to a class, what happened was the facilitators split up into each of the classrooms, and the students circulated amongst the classrooms, talking with the facilitators and their peer students to talk about what it was that the facilitator would be able to help them to learn, what their areas of expertise were. And you would circulate around, and you would find which ones sounded most appealing to you, and you would kind of settle there. And then you would work with the facilitator and the peers that had also settled in that particular group to determine what the syllabus was going to be for the course that you were going to study that year, that semester. So it was a very, very different way of approaching things. It was one of the best experiences of my life. It was a different way of learning. It was incredibly active and engaged and inquisitive, rather than sitting and having information passed to me that I was then supposed to memorize and regurgitate on a test, right? So what this really introduces is this idea of power with rather than power over. Instead of having somebody tell you what to do and, or you telling somebody what to do, it's a matter of coming together to understand how to choose what's going to be done and how you're going to do it. It's sometimes called dynamic governance, which I think is a very sexy term. That's the kind of thing that I'm sure people in boardrooms all over the place would go wild for if they ever heard it. So I think it's something of a branding exercise to bring that to the table. What it actually comes down to is a combination of Latin and Greek words that means basically partner power, okay? It's working together. So I have a degree in philosophy and linguistics, so I can't possibly not have a slide that has the word values on it. The values are pretty self-explanatory, right? We all have an innate sense of fairness. We all want to make a positive impact in the world. I'm assuming that's the case here because we're in the Community Summit, right? That's not always the case, but I would say almost universally across the Drupal sphere, that's the case. We each want to decide how we want to contribute, right? We also care about each other, and we want that reflected in the work that we do. And then we learn on a continuous basis. We're always trying to figure out how to get better at doing the things that we want to do and having a bigger impact on the world. The principles are a little bit harder to grok. Okay? Equivalence essentially comes down to saying that we're all on an equal footing. This is the root of the whole idea of this talk, of everyone's voice matters. Intentionality just comes down to not reacting to things, responding to things, understanding context, and then making rational decisions. Distributing leadership to the people who are closest to where the decisions are going to be impacting. Looking for win-win solutions. So essentially, looking for mutually beneficial solutions. Trying to break out of the scarcity thinking of your gain is my loss. And then finally, transparency, which is a little bit more familiar to most people, I assume, but the foundation of all of this is that we work in the open so that we can trust each other to do the right thing. Speaking of trust, it's not always obvious to people, but I would very highly recommend that you check out this URL if you have the chance. It was developed by a woman by the name of Nikki Case, and it's an interactive exploration of how trust works. And this basically, we're talking here about things like game theory, right? So you might be familiar with the prisoner's dilemma and whether you should work with your colleague or betray them for your own benefit. And a lot of economics takes that kind of myopic view, that single transaction where you have to choose whether to work with somebody and gain a little bit together, or stab them in the back and take it all for yourself. Right? Unfortunately, when I mention that that's myopic, it really is, because it's talking about a single transaction with a single person, one time, and no assumption that you're ever going to have to work with that person again. How often do you actually find yourselves in that kind of situation? At home, at work, in the public, you're interacting with people on an ongoing basis. Not only that, they're interacting with each other. And so in the 80s, there was a lot of work that was done on this. And it was determined that when you actually model this, that cooperation is by far the best strategy for maximizing value. This, the evolution of trust, that tool, will explain that in all kinds of depths, but in a hands-on way where you're interacting with it. It's really wonderful. I do it at least once a year just to remind myself of how that works. But essentially what this comes down to is all of this is founded on the idea that we're going to try to cooperate. And how do we do it more effectively? So sociocracy has its roots in the 1850s. It was coined by the same person who coined the term sociology. It developed throughout the 1800s and 1900s. A lot of it was influenced by Quaker practices. That's where a lot of the consensus-based decision-making came from. In the 1970s, it got a real shot in the arm with cybernetics and the development of sort of mathematical models of feedback systems and how control could work. And then into the 2000s, it really started to have a renaissance, and there was a plethora of different approaches, as we can see here. We, at Consensus, we have followed the sort of sociocracy for all approach. Now, one of the other ones that's mentioned here is holacracy. Holacracy you might have heard of. It's been adopted by some of the bigger, like I think Zappos or something like that. When I started working in a small tech nonprofit, it was a small organization that had been working together for a number of years. And what happened at one point was they got a grant. And they had this huge influx of cash, and they started to be able to hire people, and they tried to scale. They were working on a basis of consent, of consensus, and that was working very well for them. But when they started to grow, it becomes increasingly difficult to continue working on a consensus basis past a group of about 6 or 7 people. And they grew to 20, 25 people at one point. And we ended up with meetings where there were 20 people, and we were trying to hear everybody's voice on topics, and it just ground on forever, and it made no sense. And at the time, I was tasked with going out and finding some kind of solution to allow ourselves to organize in a way that remained in line with our values. And at the time, I missed all of this completely. I didn't find it. The next time around, when I was working with the company that I currently work with, I found holacracy. And it sounded kind of interesting. I was a little put off by the founder, but when he was speaking at one point introducing, I think, version 5.0 or something to that effect, he was very emphatically saying that holacracy was not sociocracy. That was the first time I ever heard the term. I was fascinated. I was like, okay, if it's not sociocracy, well, what's sociocracy all about? And so I went and looked, and I found Sociocracy for All, and everything clicked into place. All the experience I'd had previously working in consensus-based decision-making with small teams, back when I was a student and so forth, it pulled it all together. So I'm specifically talking about the sociocracy that is the Sociocracy for All, or what we sometimes call SOFA, S-O-F-A. They have a ton of introductory resources. I highly recommend that you check them out too if you're interested, including a 75-minute free introductory training that will walk you through basically everything that I'm talking about, but more hands-on and more how to get it in place. These two books are sort of the core of Sociocracy. Many Voices, One Song is the sort of thick manual that describes it in a lot of depth and detail. Who Decides Who Decides is a smaller pamphlet that kind of walks you through getting started with sociocracy. Assuming you're coming from an organization that has not implemented any of this, how do you kind of get going and bootstrap yourself into this process? I was so excited when I discovered sociocracy that I immediately went out and bulk bought both of these books and handed them out to all of my colleagues and said, this is the way, we found it. Since then, that has been proven correct, in my opinion. Sociocracy situates itself in a broader sort of movement and has a lot of ally movements that they consider to be aligned with their values. These include permaculture, NVC, Agile, the cooperative movement, and many others. In Many Voices, One Song, they mention an extensive list that oddly does not include free and open source software. The next revision will, because I talked to Ted, who wrote the book, and made sure that he understands just how well aligned this is with the free software movement. So let's start to look at how we work together in teams. Let's get a little more hands-on. So there's a bunch of principles. These are sort of the ones that we use on a day-to-day basis. So one of the main ones is speaking in rounds. So a lot of times when you're speaking in a meeting, you won't have a lot of structure, and then there's going to be the people who are sort of the loud ones and the quiet ones, right? And a lot of people are going to sit back, and they're going to be there because they have to be there, but they're not really going to participate, and they're going to check out, and then they're going to go complain on social media about how meetings suck, right? Then you're going to have the people who are like all engaged and enthusiastic, and they're talking, and they're taking up a lot of space. And that's okay. They have good ideas, they're enthusiastic, they bring a lot of energy to the table. I've been both of those people. And when I'm the one that's more talkative, I often have a concern that I'm taking up too much space, that I'm talking too much. And that's one of the things that I really work on when I'm working with my colleagues, is when we speak in rounds, we make sure that everybody gets a say. And I try to come last, because I also happen to be reasonably smart and knowledgeable about a lot of things, and if I have a chance to talk first, I'm probably going to talk about everything that everybody else is going to talk about. And so I try not to do that. A lot of this is that intentional engagement with the groups that you're working with. So I'm not going to talk a lot about that. It's kind of basic. It's the kind of thing that, it's just taking turns, right? We learned this in kindergarten. This is pretty basic stuff. But a lot of what we learned in kindergarten about just what fairness is stuff that's trained out of us as we get older. Role selection is basically how we elect people into specific roles where they have specific authority but also responsibility, right? We'll look at some of those later. We have structured agendas. Basically, when we have a meeting, it's not just open-ended and we're going to talk until people have run out of steam. We try to be very specific and focused on what we're trying to accomplish within a meeting. Sense-making is basically trying to build shared context. It's understanding together what the actual situation we're facing is. And this is one of the most important parts of what sociocracy brings to the table. What we're trying to do when we work consensually together is we're trying to overcome our internal biases and our gaps in our knowledge and experience. And so by working together in this way, that's one of the main ways we can do that. Each of us brings our own background and our own biases to the table, but when we're trying to form a common understanding of things, a lot of that gets shed along the way. We then will look sort of at what forming proposals cooperatively looks like, and then specifically what the decision-making process can look like. So I'm going to introduce circles, which are sort of a core component of the organizational structure within sociocracy. A circle is just a group of people with a common aim. That's basically it. So obviously the membership is a part of that, defining who is or not part of the circle. That's mostly a matter of who's working on a given topic. When we talk about aims, that's maybe a bit of a vague term. What it really means is what we do. So if I have an example of, say, our people circle at Consensus, their primary aim is recruiting and retaining great team members, right? Notice those are verbs, retaining, recruiting. It's the things we do. A sub-aim of that is developing a competitive compensation program, right? That's one of the ways in which we do that, the recruiting and retaining. So when it comes to domains, that's an example of a domain, right? Those are the kinds of documents and policies and processes that this circle is responsible for and has domain over. They're the ones who can make decisions about what those processes look like. The key roles within circles are going to be the leader and the delegate, and then operational roles. So operational roles are the people actually doing the work, the hands-on work, a recruiter, a compensation analyst, whatever the case may be. Generally, we don't consider that to be the same thing as a job. Roles are smaller than jobs. They're things that you do. They're a hat you wear sometimes. And what that allows you to do, in our case, is be a programmer most of the time, and then a recruiter some of the time, right? So it gives you an opportunity to really do disparate things within your day-to-day job. The leader and the delegate has to do with how this circle interacts with the rest of the circles. So we'll look at that in more detail later, but essentially what it comes down to is the leader represents the rest of the organization in telling the circle what the organization needs of the circle, and the delegate represents the circle to the rest of the organization, explaining to the rest of the organization what the circle needs in order to achieve its aims. So that's what that part looks like. So coming back to meetings, everybody's favorite topic, we try to split them up into two types, operational meetings and policy meetings. Again, we're trying to stay focused so that we can spend as little time in meetings and have as few people in meetings as possible. It's a little counterintuitive when we're trying to get everybody's voice, but at the end of the day, the meetings really come down to sort of two types of things that we're doing. Operational meetings are mostly around coordination. So it's following up on the tasks we had said we were going to do last time, holding one another accountable to getting those things done, being able to ask for help or offer help. We consume reports. So say a finance report, and trying to understand, making sense of our revenues are down this quarter. What does that mean for us, right? Are we still going to be able to organize the retreat next month, right? Those kind of things. Policy meetings are where we have to address some kind of broader problem that we've identified or are hinting at in the organization. So most of the time, we're meeting operationally. We're just coordinating. We might meet for 45 minutes a week for a given circle. Policy stuff, we have a slot every week. That's a 2-hour slot that other circles can kind of schedule into when needed. Most of the time, we don't have them. Most of what a policy meeting is going to be is exploration. So again, we're going to speak in rounds, and we're going to try to get an idea of what it is we're actually talking about. Sometimes things are vague. Somebody has an intuitive thought that there's something that's going wrong. People are frustrated at their job. We're wasting time. We're not making enough money, whatever the case may be. Bear in mind, we're a for-profit co-op, so that's a concern of ours. So we do these dimension rounds to try to get our arms around the problem and make sure we have that shared context and shared understanding of the problem. We developed something that we refer to as our problem statement framework. It's basically just thinking of what the ideal would look like for a given topic, what does the reality actually look like, and what's the consequence of the reality not matching the ideal. And then from there, we can start looking at what kind of solutions come out. So a lot of it is a matter of understanding what the problems are that we're trying to overcome. Then we start to look at forming a proposal. We figure out what those solutions might look like, and we start to build that together. And then we do a consent round. And the consent round, again, is just making sure that everybody is on board with the solution. Now, we're going to look at that in more detail, but we're then also going to address any objections. And I want to make sure that you understand that objections here are not the kind of thing that people are going to roll their eyes and get frustrated and sigh, right? Objections are how we incorporate different people's perspectives into our, the policies that we're trying to decide on. So consent-based decision-making is probably not something that most of you are directly familiar with. You've probably heard of consensus. Consensus, generally speaking, is considered to be more or less the same thing as unanimity, everybody agreeing. That's a really high bar to set, especially in a larger group. It's actually unrealistic to achieve it in a group larger than 7. Okay? It's possible, but it takes a lot of work. Unanimity and consensus usually are within the framework of deciding on one of multiple options, right? Of essentially voting without voting. What we try to do is not look at what is your preferred outcome, but what is an acceptable outcome. We try to broaden what it is that we're able to pursue so that we can come to an agreement sooner and we can test it quicker and we can see how it works for us or not, and then we can change our minds later, right? Nothing that comes out of this is ever written in stone. We're always empowered to go back and fix mistakes that we've made. But we're better off moving forward than finding ourselves stuck. So in this framework, an objection isn't just, I don't like it. It's not, I don't feel that this is the best option or anything along those lines. It has to be framed as, this is going to make it harder for us as a circle to achieve our aims. The reason we should not adopt this policy is because it makes it harder for us to do our jobs. That's how we try to frame it, because otherwise everything basically just devolves into vibes. If you're saying, I don't like it, I'm not sure it's the best approach, etc., you're not actually giving anybody else in the circle an opportunity to engage with you about what the problem is that you're trying to raise. You have to try to be focused on explaining yourself so that others can debate, that there's an opportunity to work on this stuff. You're not alone in this. Others can help you with that as well, right? You don't have to stand firm that I think this is wrong and, try to hold back the tide. At any rate, let's take a different approach here and start looking at the meeting structure more hands-on. So these meetings, one of the reasons we like to have this structure is that it makes it predictable, and then everybody kind of understands going into it what's expected of them. There's not a lot of anxiety because we know how this is going to work. We start with a check-in. Check-in's basically, what am I bringing to the table today? One of the ones I often bring to the table is, I didn't sleep particularly well last night. I'm a little unfocused. Feel free, if I'm rambling, to pull me back onto topic. It just gives you an opportunity to let people know where you're at and give them permission to engage with you in a way that's going to help you to be as productive as possible. I'm going to get to some of the other stuff, the roles a little bit later. Admin is an acronym for attendance, duration, minutes, information, and next meeting. This literally takes 2 minutes because this generally doesn't change. We're going to have a 45-minute meeting because we always have a 45-minute meeting. Information might be, I actually have to leave after 30 minutes, so let's drop it to 30 instead, right? It's very quick. The next meeting is usually on a regular schedule, and who's there is pretty straightforward, and people have usually just filled it in by the time we get to this point. Then we do the follow-up and report section. So depending on where this circle is in the structure, we might have reports from sub-circles on what their activities look like. And we'll do follow-ups on any to-dos that were assigned the previous meeting, right? That's, again, how we hold each other and ourselves accountable to actually doing the work. Then we address the agenda itself, and we get into a discussion about the topics at hand, and that takes up the rest of the meeting, right? And then finally, we do a checkout. And the checkout's basically, how do you think things went? Most of the time, it's all just thumbs up. Occasionally, something new happened that we hadn't done before, and somebody might pipe up and say, I really liked how that worked. Let's do more of that. Other things that can come up are, I'm sorry that I, blew up at you. Something's going on personally, blah, 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 right? Those kind of things. Like there's just an opportunity to reflect on what just happened, which is an opportunity for us to improve on an ongoing basis. Now, the key roles throughout all of this are different than the ones that are structural within the circles. These are specific to the meeting, and it's the facilitator and the secretary. So the facilitator is kind of the MC. They make sure things go along. They are the ones who will say, okay, next turn is James, next it's going to be Mary, etc., right? They just keep track of that kind of stuff, try to keep us on track and focused on the topic at hand. Sometimes we have another role that's a timekeeper. Depending on how many topics we're trying to address, we might have somebody who's going to keep track and let us know when we're approaching the time limit that we had assigned. Doesn't mean we have to stop at that point, but at least we can make an intentional choice to continue that discussion instead of just talking indefinitely. The secretary is responsible for making sure that good minutes are taken, especially for the 3 and 4 sections. That's incredibly important. If you don't take good minutes for what was discussed and the understanding that you came to together, you've basically just wasted your time. You're not going to remember a month from now, and nobody else in the organization is going to be able to gain any benefit. And if they start to see that they're not benefiting from the knowledge that's gained from within these meetings, they're going to start feeling that they have to come to these meetings to understand what's going on and to participate in decisions that they might otherwise have truly delegated to these subcircles, because otherwise they're going to start feeling a lot of anxiety about not understanding what's happening in the workplace that they work in. So taking those meetings is really important. Check-ins, usually we do not take minutes because it's just a personal thing. Checkouts, we do if there's something that's worth saying. If thumbs up are not worth keeping track of it, normally. So when I present these kinds of ideas in a more corporate environment or to bosses at small agencies and stuff, I get the same kind of response a lot of the time. Things like, this could never work. This will end up in chaos. We're already a meritocracy. Debate is a waste of time. Now, I understand where that can come from, especially if you haven't worked in an environment that has this kind of structure, right? But then, essentially what we're talking about is this power with rather than power over, right? If you're gonna take that seriously, you need to have something. Maybe not sociocracy, but you need to have something. Otherwise, they actually end up being correct, right? What they're missing, though, is that sociocracy needs leaders. In fact, it needs more leaders. And what it does is it cultivates that leadership. It shows people how to be leaders within an organization by providing the kind of structure within which people can do that with confidence. And what it does is it distributes power more effectively and fairly. And we'll see a little bit more how that works. Now that said, there are some pitfalls, right? There's going to be a tendency when you start hearing out people about what their thoughts and priorities are to try to do everything, to solve every problem. That's what we refer to as the boil the ocean problem, right? It means a lack of focus. So it's important to understand the difference between something being important and something being urgent, okay? Those are very easily conflated. This is the Eisenhower matrix. It's a tool that makes it really easy. You just kind of put your thing on that, what your topic is, and then you can determine what your approach should be. Should you act on it now because it's both urgent and important? Or is it not so urgent, but still pretty important, in which case maybe plan for something coming down the road, right? It's really important to take prioritization seriously. Another thing is you still need to do all the things, all the unpleasant things. We had last year to lay some people off. It was very difficult for us. We didn't want to. We liked the people very much. We enjoyed working with them, but we didn't have enough work for them. And if we didn't lay them off, the whole company was going to go under. That's an incredibly difficult choice to make, but it was one that we had to. Those choices don't go away because we're being nice to each other, because we're being fair to each other, right? The other thing that might come up is you might need to try things new ways. You might realize that management hierarchies do a lot of stuff for you, but one of the things they do is they put the power of making choices in single people's control. If you want to do things in a different way where it's more fair, the sort of standard way of doing things, especially in HR, often doesn't work, or at least not sort of out of the box. So you might want to try to fit things sort of a different way, a different approach to things. I'll give some examples later on. So let's look at how we organize ourselves to sort of scale up, right? I explained earlier how at this small tech co-op, they weren't able to scale. What ended up happening was the company split up, a lot of people went their own way, and they collapsed back down into the smaller size. The way we do that is this is sort of where that innovation happened at the level of cybernetics and in the 70s with sociocracy, is with a hierarchy of circles. This is the sociocratic circle organization method. So essentially what it is you have a general circle that's sort of responsible for the overall operations of the company. And then as you figure out sub-aims, right, more specific tasks that need to be done, you can delegate those to subgroups within the organization. Those are subcircles. That's how that works. You can continue to analyze that down to be more and more specific about the tasks. And at some point, you're going to decide this isn't something that we need a group of people to do. A single individual can do it, or maybe a couple of people, but they don't need to coordinate to do it. And that's where you start to define roles. Once you have this sort of structure in place, and we'll look at how you actually get there, what you do is double linking. So I mentioned that leader and delegate. Each circle will have a leader assigned by their parent circle, and each circle that has subcircles will have a delegate from each of the subcircles. It's really important to understand that they're both full members of both circles. So the delegate from a subcircle is not just there as an observer at the parent circle where the important, where the adults in the room are. That's not how it works. They're a full member representing their subcircle within the parent circle. And then what this provides, what this creates, is feedback loops, right? This is where that cybernetics part comes in. The leader and the delegate, by transferring information back and forth, ensures that the entire organization knows what's going on. Now, this is a little bit misleading because it seems to mean that one of the circles at the bottom would have to go to their parent circle, then to general circle, then down to another circle, then another circle for them to talk. That's not the case. That's just, you're just making things difficult. People can just talk to each other, right? Nothing about this says you can't do how things you would normally do. But what it ensures is that there's at least a stopgap or not a stopgap, a backstop, where at very least information will eventually transfer its way all the way around the organization. So how do we actually build this? So if you're starting from scratch, it's a little bit easier in a sense because you don't have any existing status quo that you're trying to change. So I'm just going to give that example and then we can kind of look at how that works. So you start with the organization aim, right? The aim of the overall organization. Chances are you're going to have more than one. It's important to remember, though, that the aim is not the same as the mission. Okay? The mission generally isn't going to be structured as a task that you do. Right? Then you figure out the sub-aims, right? And you assign those where it makes sense to subcircles. When there's a big enough chunk, you're going to hand it off to the next circle. For example, overall, we need to operate in a certain way. We're going to need our team to have certain people with certain skill sets. We're going to make that our people circle's responsibility. Then you think about sub-aims and you start to populate circles. You start to think about what of these are roles and which of these are actual circles. You start connecting it with those linking roles. And then you decide how you're going to go about adopting it. If you're starting from scratch, you can just start doing it. This is what that Who Decides book walks you through in a lot more detail. It gives you the agenda of the meetings you should have to be able to build this. If, on the other hand, you're already working together and you have a different way of operating now, you'll have to figure out what a transition looks like. But it doesn't end there. This is a continuously evolving process, right? None of this should ever be fixed in the sense that once you figured out what works for you now, guaranteed 6 months from now, a year from now, you're going to have to adapt. Things are going to change. You're going to have new people join the company, people are going to leave, new clients, new changes in the market, etc. You're going to have to adapt. So don't take things as written in stone. So an objection coming sort of from the other end of the table is if you're already doing some of these things, you might think you're doing enough. And it's very possible that you are. But you might hear things like, we want a flatter structure, right? We prefer to be less formal. We already listen to each other and vote on important topics. That's great. There are probably going to be some problems that we're going to talk about later that you might recognize as symptoms if you're doing this in a sort of non-structured manner, or what you think is unstructured. What sociocracy provides is intentional structure. Structure that's on purpose, that doesn't just happen because somebody happens to be a little louder in the meeting and everybody listens to them, and so they accumulate power, right? hierarchy of scope is justified. It makes sense. It's kind of a taxonomy, essentially, right? We use hierarchies all the time. One of the problems that we had at that small tech nonprofit was that they just rejected all hierarchy. They wouldn't have somebody named a project manager because the term manager was in it, right? That's still a role that's needed. That functionality still exists. And this comes down to this power relationships are going to exist whether you like it or not, and whether you acknowledge them or not. And so there's a point between formal structure and informal structure. You don't get to choose whether you have structure or not. You're going to have structure. You get to choose between it being a formal structure, where people can understand the structure and engage with it and have an opportunity to make it better, or you end up with an informal structure where people don't really know how things work, except it's kind of how we do things here, right? The person to talk to is Christopher. He knows how it works. Go ask him, right? What you need to do is convince him that that's going to change, that that should change. Is that really not structured? Probably not. There's this excellent article called The Tyranny of Structurelessness, 6 or 7 pages. I highly recommend that you read it. Again, this came from the 70s. It came out of second wave feminism and a point at which women were trying to move from raising awareness within their peers to activism, to going from an internal focused organization to an externally focused one. And she does a tremendously good job of explaining what the dynamic is around informal structures. You also have the tyranny of the majority. So this is where if you vote on things, that's great. You only need 50% plus 1 if you've got 2 choices. What about the other 49%? Right? Are you just going to leave them out in the cold? If you have 3 choices, it gets worse. You only need a plurality, right? 34% is enough to carry the day. And so almost 2/3 of people are being left out of those kind of the solutions that you're ending up adopting. What it does is it doesn't incentivize collaboration and compromise. It incentivizes gaming and politics. And then you also have the tyranny of the minority. If you are committed to hearing out everybody, without some kind of structure for how you're going to operate together, a lot of times what you end up with is people bringing their personal drama to meetings. I am a huge, huge proponent for therapy. Okay? I'm going to be calling my therapist on Wednesday so that we have our regular weekly meeting. However, a work meeting is not the right place for that. You can ask for help from your colleagues, that's fine, but if you're derailing things, it's not going to help. And if you don't have anything more than if you've decided you're going to work on a consensus basis, one person being stubborn is all you need for things to get derailed. And if you don't insist on them making an argument for their position, then you're going to end up being kind of stuck and wasting a lot of time, and it ends up being who has the most stamina to keep arguing. And that's not pleasant for anybody. So, some additional pitfalls. Don't skip the important parts. The important parts are also the hard parts. Actually understanding what it is you do is hard. Most of the time, we're just doing stuff. We're not having to describe it in a way that makes sense to other people. This is one of the mistakes we made. We were already operating in a certain way. We already had kind of teams that had sort of split up and cohered in different ways. And we didn't take the aims part seriously. We just decided on circles. And then what we ended up having to do about a year later was go back and fill in all the aims. And then we realized the structure wasn't really fitting what we were trying to do. And so the frustrations that some of us were feeling at how we were operating and how it was suboptimal became clear. And then we changed our structure to suit. Things have been much smoother since. Take the time. Another thing is don't confuse the general circle with all hands. I'm probably running out of time. I think I have run out of time. At any rate, 5? Okay. When you're small and you start, everybody is the same as the people who are making decisions, right? We have an all hands, it's a pseudo circle, okay? that we distinguish now from General Circle. Because we were at one point saying, well, wait, if General Circle is responsible for everything, shouldn't everybody be there? And that didn't make sense to us, and we couldn't figure out why. And that's because General Circle is just the management committee. They're not everybody. And we had to represent everybody when it came to things like who would be invited to the annual retreat. Everybody, right? Another thing is, don't think you're alone. Sociocracy for All has a tremendous number of resources. There's other peers that are doing this. There's hundreds, if not thousands, of organizations that have adopted this. There are so many resources out there. Don't feel like you have to solve all of these problems yourself. So I'm going to quickly take a look at some of the benefits and challenges. These are ones that we have been seeing, right? So we use sociocracy internally, and the ways that we really appreciate it is largely that we're values-driven in our policymaking, right? We wanted to. We set that out as one of our goals, was that we were going to be driven by our policies. And now, whenever we're making a policy, values are part of the discussion, right? People can object to a policy because it contravenes one of our values. One of the policies that we ended up developing was some criteria on what kind of clients we were comfortable working with. Most of our projects are with government departments in Canada, and some of us are committed pacifists, and so are not comfortable working with, say, the RCMP or the military. So we decided that those were the kinds of clients that, if the company were to adopt it, some of us would feel that we had to leave. And that's the criteria we used for determining whether a client was acceptable or not. And we've turned down very lucrative contracts on that basis. Our hiring processes, we work with smaller teams where we do what's called a helper circle, which would be the equivalent of like a project team that come together for a specific purpose, to hire a new web developer, for example. Those processes are much more humane now than they would have been previously. Our compensation philosophy is something that we've been debating again recently. We are doing stuff that doesn't seem like anybody else does. We, for example, we pay for every hour you work, but you're not working on an hourly basis. We adjust your salary quarter per quarter for the work you did the prior quarter, so that if you have to take some time off to take a family member to the hospital, you get to choose whether you're going to make up the time or you're just going to let your salary drop slightly for a quarter and then it'll come back up automatically when you haven't taken some time off. You also don't have to ask anybody permission to do that. Of course, you need to coordinate with your colleagues and teammates in terms of what your availability is going to be like, but you don't have to ask and get permission for it. You don't have to record it anywhere, except for the fact that you're not punching your time at that point. We also have a completely transparent salary calculator because we wanted to work in a way that would allow us to feel fair about the salaries we're paying. And then we do these competency evaluations to try to measure people's contribution to the company, and then that's part of what we use as criteria for our salary calculator, right? These are things that we looked for off-the-shelf solutions that would solve the problems in the ways that we were looking to, that were compliant with our values, and we just didn't find any. And so these are examples of doing things a little differently. We also use sociocracy externally on our client projects. Whenever we do sort of general Scrum, Agile style projects, our meetings are run the way that I described our meetings, with a fixed agenda, and we ask our clients to consent to the description of the tasks that were accomplished in that iteration. That way, months later, nobody can ever say, wait a minute, you didn't tell me this wasn't going at the pace we thought, or this was going to be harder or take more effort. We're very explicit about that. In fact, I've used this with projects I've worked with the Drupal Association and a discovery workshop that we did for them. This is particularly well suited for our discovery workshops because essentially what we're trying to do is make sure we're understanding the needs and demands of all the stakeholders. So this kind of system works tremendously well with it. Where we're finding it a little rougher is sometimes with partnerships. So how does an organization work with another organization when they've got this sort of distributed leadership? That's a bit of a challenge, but we're finding ways to make it work. And similarly with service providers, right? We have a CFO team that's chartered accountants, and we have an HR person that's properly certified for that kind of work. And they embed themselves in our teams, and that works very well as well. Some of the challenges that we've seen, and this is my last slide, this doesn't work for everybody. As I mentioned, we determined a way to determine which clients we wanted to work with and which were ones that we didn't. That didn't work for one of our founders. He disagreed with that sufficiently that he ended up leaving. And that's okay, right? We determined by virtue of having lived our values that our values were not in sync in this particular way. And it was sufficiently important that he felt it needed resolution in this way. Trusting subcircles and peers can still be a challenge, right? We're not used to working in this way. It's hard, right? If you're not transparent about the work you're doing, it's hard. One of the challenges is that transparency, taking good minutes and writing stuff up is hard, right? So we're exploring ways to use AI to summarize our meetings and take notes for us, right? Things like that. And then finding adapting tools is challenging because there really aren't a lot of tools that off the shelf are designed specifically for this kind of operating model. The vast majority of them are going to assume that you have a management hierarchy. It's one of the reasons why we've started this work on Synchrony, which is a Drupal-based distribution to specifically support our operations with regards to sociocracy. So I'm working with Ted at Sociocracy for All. They're going to be one of our strategic partners, and they're going to be promoting it to their hundreds of clients that are the organization members for beta testing. And so we're hoping to roll out some initial alpha testing later this year. So at any rate, this is sort of a half-done slide, but Ted and I are also building sociocracy.news, which is going to be a Planet-style blog aggregator for sociocracy news. And then sociocracy.now is just the domain for the Sociocracy app. I'll leave it at that. And then I think I have a QA thing here. There we go. I welcome you all to email me if you have any questions or track me down. I'm here all week. I am very passionate about this. I'm also fairly knowledgeable about it. I have hands-on experience doing it directly with sociocracy for about 4 years, but going back 30 years in terms of my initial introduction to it. I am very happy to talk about this at length. So feel free to tap me on the shoulder anytime this week. And if you don't catch up with me this week, just email me. Thank you very much. I don't think we have any time for questions. So. You can have 5 minutes if somebody has a question. Are there any questions? All right, well, clearly I either did a really bad job or a really good job, so thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Christopher. That was great.
Thank you, appreciate it.
All right. We're almost there, guys, I promise. We're almost there. Bringing this thing in for a landing. All right, so let me swap out the laptops here. And we've gotten to that portion of our show where we break into some smaller groups to talk about some things, better known as roundtable discussions. Let's see if this does what I want it to do. No? Okay. Okay. What's happening? Block 1 second. Just gonna move this somewhere. Where is it? Here it is. Okay. We're almost there. We're almost there. Give me a second. All right. You know what? I'm just going to leave this here. Okay. So we have a couple of roundtables. We have the events platform with Martin. So Martin's in the back. Martin, raise your hand. There's Martin. If you want to talk about events platform, you guys can find a table back there and talk about that with him. The Midwest Open Source Alliance and just event support in general. Avi's right here. Awesome, thank you. Ally Talks, accessibility. April is up front. You guys can move to tables that don't have people at them if you want to have more room. I'm going to be doing non-code contribution. My water bottle's on that table right there. So if you're interested in that, feel free to jump up here. And then JD is in the back. There he is. Member platform. I do encourage, if there's anything that's not on this list that you want to talk about, find a couple of folks to talk about it, form your own tables. This is kind of like free form time to find people and talk to them about things you care about. So go for it. we are not going to do report backs. So you just talk about it, and I do encourage that if anything tangible comes out, maybe toss that up on an issue on Drupal.org if you have a project to do it to. Hey, what? Yeah, go for it. So Chris Weber right here is going to do a table for Experience Builder. So if you're interested in Experience Builder, he's going to be at that table over there. So find Chris. He's wearing a hat.